So one of the things that I've been thinking about here with my Vim configuration is just how can I restore where I was at the last time I worked on a project or a workspace. So I've settled on something rather basic, no plugins or extensions involved. So I want to step through that here. So the first thing I want to do, I want to show you this in action here. I've got a .files repo here. If I go ahead and open this up inside of Vim, you can see I open up this file with setup workspace. Whereas if I come over to a different repository, my examples repository, different directory altogether, if I open this one up here, you can see I open up an entirely different file. So the first thing I set up was the ability per project to be able to resume the files that I was working on. And so for example, over here, if I wanted to open something else up like early, if I split the screen here, you can see I've got early on the left and maybe I jump down 15 lines. And so on the left, I've got early, on the right, I've got setup workspace. And so if I quit out of all of this here, open it back up, you can see it resumes exactly where I was at. I have both windows. I have both files with the exact same cursor position that I had previously. And of course, when I save this, it doesn't affect my other project here. If I quit out of this and open this back up, I still get my requirements.txt file. And then the other thing that I wanted here, when I'm working on a given project, I'd like the command history to be specific to that project. So for example, here, if I hit the up arrow inside of the command line, you can see I really have nothing available. Same is true here. If I search, I have no previous searches here. If I put in foo, now I've looked for foo. If I put in kernel, I can look for kernel. So if I do slash and hit up here, I have those two matches. And the cool thing is if I quit out now, open that back up, if I do a slash again, you can see up arrow here, I have foo and I have kernel. So I have my search history or command history, as well as jumps and markers and registers, and a lot of other things that I feel like should be project specific. And project for me largely just means a repository root. So I delineate each repo as its own project. And so when I open that repo back up, I want to pick up where I left off with those files. And so let me show you how this is set up here. And close out of this on the left here. If I collapse that down there, basically in my setup or initialization files here, I have this setup workspace function. So if I go ahead and open that up. So inside of here, the first thing I do, I look for a repo root. If I find one, I'm going to use that as the context for the project. If I don't find one, then that's when I'll go ahead and just use the current working directory instead. So I need to get a directory for the workspace. Once I have that then, so I take a hash of that absolute path. I use that so that I can store the session and the shada file specific to that particular workspace separate from the session and shada file for every other workspace. If you want to see what that looks like here, if I jump over here, list out this, you can see I have hashes here for various projects. I think the first one is the one I'm working on right now. Doesn't really matter though. The key is inside of here, I've got the shada file that has my jumps, my command history, my search history. And then I've got the session Vim, which basically right now just tracks the windows that are open, their sizing, as well as the file that they have opened up. So I built up a hash to this particular file here. You can see the path on disk. So inside of my config mvim directory, I've got shada and workspaces. Actually, shada is a relic. I should get rid of that in the path. I set that path up when I was initially developing this, and it was just going to store shada. So it now just needs to be workspaces. And so if I come back over here, here's the line where I build up the workspace directory, what we just saw a moment ago. And then inside of there, I'm going to store the shada file. So you can see /shada on the end of the line. And then here I'm setting the Vim option for the shada file. When you do that, then that shared data file is going to be in a different spot. Otherwise, it'll be using a main shared data file that's shared among all of your instances of Vim. So when I override that, then it goes and gets the file for this workspace. All right, so next up here, I build up a path to the session.vim file. If I scroll down here, first up, I specify the things that I want to store for the session Vim file. I narrow this down to just the things I care about. For example, I'll save blank windows, also save the fold history. And then if I have any help windows, I'll save those as well. So if I were to do a help here, do shada, opens up the help. If I quit out of everything here, open it back up. There you go. You can see I resumed the help file up above, quit out of that. And now down below, you can see I was right where I was at with the session options inside of that workspace's function. All right, so once I set up the options that I want to save, there's two methods that are helping me out then. Maybe first up here, if I jump down to the end of this file, when I quit out of Vim, I call my leave save session method, which will automatically save that session Vim. Otherwise, I'd have to do that by hand. I didn't want to do that. Instead, I feel like there should just be one session per project. If I need anything beyond that, I could do something different. But for now, just save the session here when I exit out. And to do that, I need to close the tree view. I was having problems with that, and I don't care to get that to work to resume where it was at. So I close out of that if it's open, and then I call save session, and I set this up to be a function, so I could call save session anytime I want. For example, I could call here save session, run that. Now if I open up a new tab here, now if I open up Vim again, you can see I jumped to right where I was at. So at any point in time, I can call save session. And of course, when I exit out, I call save session as well. And all it does here, it uses the make session command to create the session file, and it uses those session options that I set up above. So that's on the way out. That's when I quit Vim. When I open it back up, though, that's when I call restore session. Again, I've got this set up to be a function just so I can comment it out. I've got the call down here to this. And then inside of this function, I do a couple of things. First up, I check and see, is there a session file? So that session.vim, does it exist? If it doesn't, I bail out of this and I leave a message that there's no session file. I should probably comment that out. That was just for debugging. If there is a file, though, down here, I execute a source command to source that file, which is like running a Vim script. So inside of that file, you have various commands that'll set up the state that you're working with. And so at that point in time, I might have two separate windows or a help window. And then the other thing I do here, before I explain it, let me come over to a new tab here. So if I just run mvim here, I want to resume where exactly I was at before when I called save session last. However, if I quit out of here, if I pass a path here, like to this pyrite config JSON file, if I pass a path, I want to restore the session, and then I want to open up any of these files. So pyrite JSON, you can see I open up right to that. And of course, if I do Control I here, I come back then, there's my save session that I was looking at. And so that is why I have the logic here for files before load. Essentially, I capture the files that are passed when I start up Vim, if any. And then down here, if there are any files, I go ahead and take each of them and I call edit on each one, which will open it back up. And so that allows me to have the last file I worked on, as well as to pass a few more to open up beyond that. And that's about it, actually. If you have ideas here for things I'm overlooking, let me know what you do down below. I'd love to hear some feedback and see if I can't make further improvements on this.